Life for me was a suffocating cycle of chasing oblivion, a haze of self-destruction I thought I controlled. But then, one ordinary night, a crushing exhaustion pulled me under, not into sleep, but somewhere far beyond. What if everything we believe about life, death, and time itself is just a carefully constructed lie? And what if the only way to truly live is to first die? For years, my life was a frantic dance with oblivion, a constant yearning to escape the relentless hum of a world that never quite felt real. I thought I was in control, but looking back, I was just a prisoner of my own making. Before April 21st, 2023, my world was a muted palette of grays, a constant struggle against an invisible current. My name is Nadia, and for the better part of my 20s, I existed in a fog. I was in my basement apartment, a space that felt less like a home and more like a hideout. My days were a monotonous blur, dictated by the relentless grip of an eating disorder and a growing dependency on substances. I worked a job that paid the bills but offered no fulfillment, often finding myself staring blankly at spreadsheets, the numbers blurring into an unreadable mess. My character? I suppose you could say I was an expert at avoidance, a master of self-sabotage. My routine was less about living and more about surviving, waking up late, going through the motions, and then seeking solace in unhealthy habits as the day bled into night. Childhood memories, when they surfaced, were often tinged with a strange duality. I recall the innocent joy of long, summer days spent exploring the woods near my grandparents' house in Virginia, the humid air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. There was a sense of freedom there, a wildness that resonated deep within me. Yet, even then, an undercurrent of unease sometimes crept in, a fleeting sense of being in the wrong place, a phantom ache I couldn't explain. I remembered the comfort of my grandfather's presence, the smell of his pipe tobacco and old books, the way his laughter would fill the room. But there were also the darker moments, snippets of emotional turmoil, and an unsettling feeling of being profoundly alone, even in a crowded room. These fleeting glimpses of past pain, though largely unexamined at the time, laid a subtle groundwork for the fear that would later consume me. Emotionally, I was a battlefield. Happiness felt like a fleeting guest, quickly overshadowed by a persistent undercurrent of anxiety and a deep, gnawing sense of disappointment. I was constantly searching for something, though I couldn't articulate what it was. It felt like a fundamental piece of myself was missing, a void I desperately tried to fill with anything that promised temporary relief. There was a profound loneliness, a feeling of being disconnected from everyone and everything, despite having friends and family around me. My days were often punctuated by periods of intense boredom, followed by frantic attempts to numb the emptiness. It was a suffocating cycle, a slow descent into a quiet despair. My beliefs about life and death, if I had any concrete ones, were vague and deeply cynical. I was a skeptic, not out of conviction, but out of a profound lack of faith in anything beyond what I could physically see and touch. Death was the ultimate end, a black curtain falling on the stage of existence. There was no afterlife, no higher purpose, just oblivion. This belief, or lack thereof, fueled a deep-seated fear of loss. Every connection felt fragile, every moment fleeting, and the idea of truly surrendering to anything, be it love or belief, felt like setting myself up for inevitable heartbreak. I longed for meaning, for something to cling to, but my rational mind, coupled with my emotional turmoil, kept me tethered to a bleak, deterministic view of the universe. Little did I know, this entire framework was about to be utterly dismantled. The day itself felt like a slow-motion unraveling, a relentless pull into a profound weariness I couldn't fight. My body felt heavy, my thoughts distant, as if I were already slipping away, piece by agonizing piece. The morning of April 21st, 2023 began like countless others in my dim basement apartment. The weak sunlight struggled to penetrate the small window, casting a faint, dusty glow on my familiar clutter. I woke up late, as usual, the taste of yesterday's choices still lingering on my tongue. There was no grand plan for the day, just the usual routine. Drag myself out of bed, make some half-hearted attempts at being productive, and then retreat into the familiar comfort of self-medication. The air was thick with a humid stillness, a typical spring day in the mid-Atlantic, but I barely registered it. My world had shrunk to the confines of those four walls and the internal landscape of my own distress. I remember trying to focus on mundane tasks, replying to an email, tidying the corner of the room, but my mind felt like a skipping record, unable to hold a thought. The danger that day wasn't a sudden external force. It was a slow, insidious erosion from within, a consequence of years of unaddressed pain. For a long time, I'd been locked in a brutal battle with an eating disorder and a growing reliance on substances. These weren't isolated issues. They were deeply intertwined, each exacerbating the other, pushing my body to its absolute limits. My heart in particular had been bearing the brunt of it. I'd developed cardiac complications, POTS, a condition that made my heart race wildly even at rest, and an unpredictable arrhythmia that felt like a trapped bird fluttering erratically in my chest. On this particular night, the combination of alcohol, benzodiazepines, and dextromorphine was a potent cocktail, placing immense strain on an already fragile system. Add to that a severe relapse into restrictive eating and purging behaviors, and my body was in a state of quiet rebellion. Compounding it all was a dissociative fugue, a symptom of complex PTSD, where my mind would periodically check out, leaving me disoriented and with gaping holes in my memory. I was unraveling, physically and mentally, and I was doing it all in solitude. There was no sudden jolt, no dramatic premonition. Instead, it was a creeping weariness, a profound lethargy that settled deep into my bones. It wasn't the kind of tired that sleep could fix. It was a deeper, more fundamental exhaustion. Earlier in the evening, I was on the phone with friends, trying to keep up with the conversation, but their voices began to sound distant, muffled. My words felt heavy in my mouth, and I kept losing the thread of what we were talking about. It was as if a thick, invisible curtain was slowly descending around me, muting the world. There was a faint, almost imperceptible twinge of fear, a flicker of awareness that something was profoundly wrong, but it was quickly overridden by this overwhelming urge to just give in, to just rest. My body screamed for it, a silent plea I was too accustomed to ignoring. As the evening wore on, the sense of dread intensified, though it was still a quiet dread, a whispered warning rather than a shout. The heaviness in my limbs grew, a concrete weight that pinned me to the couch. My heart hammered, then faltered, then sped up again, an erratic drumbeat signaling impending chaos. The blue glow of the television offered little comfort, its familiar dialogue dissolving into an incoherent drone. I was fighting, or perhaps just observing, my own gradual surrender. The outside world receded, and my consciousness narrowed, focusing solely on the unbearable weight pressing down on me. There was a peculiar peace in it, a deceptive calm that masked the true peril. I told my friends good night, a final, fading connection to the waking world, and then with an almost welcoming sigh, I let the darkness consume me. The world as I knew it dissolved, not with a bang, but a gentle, profound surrender. I was no longer a body, but a boundless awareness, tumbling into an abyss where time and space ceased to exist, and every truth I'd ever sought began to unfold. The final moments before the shift were a strange symphony of paradoxes. The crushing heaviness in my limbs intensified, pinning me to the couch, yet simultaneously a profound lightness began to bloom within my chest. My heart, which had been a frantic drum, seemed to quiet, replaced by an almost blissful stillness. There was no pain, no fear, just an overwhelming sense of relief,
as if a lifetime of burdens had suddenly evaporated. I felt a gentle, almost imperceptible tug, a sensation of being drawn upwards, out of the physical shell that had become so cumbersome. It wasn't a violent expulsion, but a graceful, almost eager release. My consciousness, once a prisoner of my ailing body, felt like a balloon untethered, floating free. My first vision was both startling and strangely mundane. I saw myself, or rather my body, sprawled on the couch below, the faint blue glow of the television still flickering across the room. It was a detached observation, like watching a scene from a movie. There was no emotional attachment to that form, just a curious recognition. The room, my familiar basement, seemed to recede, its edges blurring, its details fading into an indistinct backdrop. This moment of depersonalization was absolute. I was no longer Nadia in a physical sense, but an observer, a consciousness untethered, watching the remnants of a life I was leaving behind. Then the initial metaphysical phenomena began to unfold, subtly at first, then with overwhelming clarity. A light emerged, not from a single source, but as an omnipresent luminescence that permeated everything. It wasn't the harsh, blinding light of the sun, but a soft, pulsating brilliance made of colors that defy earthly description. Hues of emerald and sapphire, amethyst and gold, shifting and swirling in an impossible dance. It was both incredibly vibrant and profoundly soothing, an enveloping warmth that seeped into every fiber of my being, dissolving any lingering remnants of fear or anxiety. Its nature was pure, unfiltered energy, a living radiance that seemed to communicate understanding without words. Sound, or rather, a lack of conventional sound, marked this transition. The muffled dialogue from the TV, the distant hum of the world, all faded into absolute silence. Yet within that silence, a new form of communication began to emerge. It wasn't a voice in the auditory sense, but a clear, resonant knowing that vibrated through my very essence. And then, before any distinct voice, I felt a presence, a gentle, undeniably feminine energy, soft and comforting, like a cosmic embrace. It was a soothing balm, guiding me, reassuring me, even before I understood what was happening. It felt ancient, infinitely wise, and imbued with an unconditional love that was breathtaking. In those first moments, a nascent reevaluation began. Fleeting thoughts, unbidden and profound, flickered through my awareness. Is this it? Is this what death truly is? But the questions weren't laced with dread, rather a burgeoning curiosity. The fear that had ruled my earthly life, the fear of loss, of the unknown, simply wasn't there. There was a deep sense of peace, a quiet acceptance that whatever was happening, it was exactly as it should be. I understood in a nascent way that I was not ending, but merely transitioning. As I surrendered further, I plunged deeper into the out-of-body experience. The feeling of lightness transformed into an exhilarating sense of absolute freedom. I was no longer falling, but floating, soaring through an infinite expanse. There were no physical limitations, no gravity, no resistance. My essence moved with effortless grace, unbound by the constraints of a body. It was a profound release, an absolute calm that bordered on euphoria. The contrast with my earthly existence, where every movement had felt heavy, every breath a struggle, was staggering. This was true liberation, a dance of pure consciousness. Then, the contacts began. I sensed a multitude of positive, familiar presences around me, a chorus of benevolent energy, though I couldn't identify them all. But then, a distinct presence solidified, unmistakable and profoundly comforting. My grandfather. He had passed in 2017, taken swiftly by an aggressive cancer, and his absence had left a gaping hole in my family. Now he was here, not as a physical form, but as a vibrant, loving energy. I didn't see him with my eyes, but I perceived him with every fiber of my being. Communication wasn't through spoken words, but pure telepathy, a direct transfer of thought and emotion. I'm so proud of you, Nadia. I've missed you. I love you. And then, impossibly, I smelled him. The robust red wines he loved, the aromatic cheeses from his old house, the comforting scent of 100 family dinners. Suddenly, I wasn't just hearing him, I was there, transported to his living room, a 7-year-old me curled up on the rug, watching PBS Kids, his beloved chocolate lab Riley, a warm weight at my side. The vividness was breathtaking, a moment of pure, unadulterated love and nostalgia. I'm so glad to see you. I love and miss you too, I thought. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that he heard me. He conveyed a powerful message. He saw my potential, even when he was alive, and he was here to help me see it now. My work on Earth wasn't done. As swiftly as his presence manifested, it dissolved, and the brilliant light intensified, growing brighter, more intense, yet still gentle. It was then that the panorama of life, or rather lives, began. It wasn't a linear slideshow, but an instantaneous, all-encompassing download of information, a visceral experience of past existences. I was no longer just Nadia. I was a little girl, terrified and alone, lying in a creek bed in the humid Appalachian woods. The canopy of trees above me was a blur of green, the air thick and muggy, suffocating. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that something was terribly wrong with my head, and a profound violation had occurred. Fear, pure and primal, gripped me, mixed with a desperate yearning to get up, to run home to my family. But I couldn't move. My body was too weak, too broken. A crushing heaviness settled in my chest, and I knew, with a clarity that transcended thought, that I was dying. This wasn't a memory. It was a re-experiencing, the pain and terror echoing through my essence. It was a revelation, understanding that the unexplained traumas and anxieties of my current life, the uncanny feelings I'd always had in the woods at night, the specific smells that triggered an unexplainable dread, were echoes of this past death, unresolved grief carried across lifetimes. Then the scene shifted, and I was a closeted French painter with a meticulously groomed mustache, living a life of quiet longing and artistic passion in a bygone era. These weren't just images. They were full sensory experiences, entire lifetimes lived and understood in what felt like a single, timeless moment. I understood time as it truly is, not a consecutive, linear progression, but an explosion of eternity, all at once for infinity. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly liberating. I grasped that the past, present, and future are not separate, but interwoven, a vast tapestry of existence. And then, the central, most profound revelation, the feeling of unity, of unconditional love. It was an overwhelming, all-encompassing sensation, a boundless ocean of pure, undiluted love that was the very fabric of existence. I wasn't just in it, I was it. Every atom, every star, every living being was connected, part of one vast, harmonious consciousness. There was no separation, no judgment, only an infinite, benevolent presence that was the source of all. This love was not sentimental. It was the fundamental truth of the universe, the underlying force that held everything together. It was the ultimate comfort, the ultimate belonging, and its transformative impact was immediate and absolute. My life on Earth, once ruled by fear and isolation, suddenly made sense within this grand, interconnected design. From this state of profound unity, knowledge flowed into me, not as words or concepts, but as pure understanding. I realized that death, as humans perceive it, is merely an illusion of the physical form. The soul, my essence, never dies. This lifetime is but one chapter in an endless spiritual journey. My first 20 years, I understood, had been dedicated to healing from the trauma of that past life, the echoes of a violent end. Once that healing began, my true purpose in this life could emerge: spiritual connection, guiding others, serving as a messenger between realms. I saw that every challenge, every hardship, no matter how senseless it seemed, was a lesson for the soul, a necessary step in its evolution. We encounter the same souls over and over, playing different roles, teaching each other different lessons across lifetimes. I understood that everyone is on their own unique journey, on their own timeline, and comparing ourselves to others is futile, for an old soul can inhabit a young body. I learned that love is everywhere, the fundamental currency of the cosmos. If you give love unconditionally, without expectation, good things will return. Kindness, time, empathy, these are not commodities to be profited from, but inherent truths to be shared. The universe, I realized, is a mirror, reflecting back the energy we put into it. This was the culmination of intellectual and spiritual insight, a complete recalibration of my understanding of reality, purpose, and the very nature of existence.
Just as effortlessly as I drifted into that boundless expanse, I was violently hurled back. It felt like diving headfirst into an icy pool after basking in the warmth of 1,000 suns. A shock so visceral, it stole my breath and left me gasping for a reality I no longer recognized. The return was abrupt, a violent re-entry after an eternity of grace. One moment I was pure consciousness, floating in an ocean of unconditional love and cosmic understanding. The next, it was as if an invisible train, rushing at impossible speed, slammed into me, propelling me back through a shimmering tunnel of light. The lightness vanished instantly, replaced by an agonizing, crushing weight. My essence, which had expanded to encompass the universe, was now forcefully compressed back into the narrow confines of my physical body. It was a jarring, sickening jolt, like hitting the ground after a freefall. My lungs, which hadn't needed to breathe, convulsed, and I took a huge, desperate gasp of air, a raw, ragged sound that tore from my throat. My body flung itself upright from the couch, every muscle screaming in protest, eyes snapping open to the familiar yet utterly alien dimness of my basement apartment. In those first disorienting seconds, my mind reeled. What just happened? Where am I? The profound peace, the boundless knowledge, the overwhelming love, all seemed to evaporate, leaving behind a jarring confusion. There was an immediate and profound sense of loss, a gnawing emptiness where boundless joy had been. It was like waking from the most vivid, transcendent dream, only to find yourself back in a stark, uncomfortable reality, knowing you could never truly convey what you'd experienced. A terrifying thought pierced through the haze. I've officially lost it. This is psychosis. This is the end of my sanity. The panic, a cold, sharp blade, cut through the fading remnants of spiritual bliss. How could I have been gone for an eternity, met my grandfather, experienced entire past lives, and yet only 10 or 15 minutes had elapsed on the clock? The discrepancy was impossible to reconcile, pushing me further into a spiraling terror. My physical body, after its brief hiatus from consciousness, reacted with a brutal honesty. I was drenched in sweat, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, not from euphoria now, but from sheer terror. Every muscle ached, as if I'd run a marathon. My limbs felt heavy and leaden, in stark contrast to the effortless movement of my soul. I was disoriented, nauseous, and profoundly weak. Standing felt like an insurmountable task. The world around me, once vibrant with cosmic energy, now seemed dull,
flat and painfully confined. The simple act of breathing felt laborious, each inhale a reminder of the dense, restrictive nature of being flesh and bone again.
I was alone when it happened, so there was no immediate audience for my bewildered resurrection. The silence of the apartment was deafening, amplifying my internal chaos. The next day, however, the urge to find answers, to make sense of the incomprehensible, was overwhelming. I reached out to my psychiatrist, the only person I felt safe enough to approach with something so utterly bizarre. "I need to go to that trauma treatment program you mentioned," I told her, my voice shaky, barely containing the frantic energy bubbling beneath the surface. I omitted the details of what I had seen and felt, terrified she would dismiss it as a psychotic break. The unspoken fear was palpable. Will she believe me? Will she understand that I'm not crazy, just fundamentally changed? Her reaction was one of professional concern, a measured response to what she likely perceived as a severe dissociative episode. There was no outright disbelief, but certainly no recognition of the profound spiritual reality I had just glimpsed. It was clear I was on my own in trying to process this. My first attempts to share, even obliquely, were met with polite bewilderment or gentle redirection back to my mental health. People tried to be supportive, but their eyes held a flicker of concern, a settled judgment that suggested they thought I was unwell. How could I explain that the illness that had seemingly taken me to the brink was also the gateway to the most profound truth I had ever known? The contrast between their perceived reality and my newly expanded one created an isolating chasm. It was clear that this journey, in many ways, was one I had to walk largely alone. The Nadia who slipped into the darkness that night ceased to exist. I emerged from the abyss a different being, imbued with an unshakable certainty. Death is not an ending, but a doorway, and life, in all its chaotic beauty, is an intricate chapter in an eternal story. The immediate aftermath of that night was a disorienting blend of lingering terror and profound, undeniable transformation. For 6 months, I grappled with the enormity of what I'd experienced, often convincing myself it was merely a traumatic flashback, a figment of a fractured mind. But the shift in my consciousness was too radical, too undeniable. It was only when I stumbled upon other accounts of near-death experiences that the pieces clicked into place, revealing a shared tapestry of human potential far beyond what I had imagined. Global changes in my entire life underwent a seismic shift. The relentless, suffocating cycle of my eating disorder and substance use simply faded. The obsessive thoughts, the compulsive behaviors, the deep-seated fear that fueled them, they lost their power. It wasn't an overnight cure, but the profound understanding I gained stripped them of their compelling grip. My priorities, once centered on control and avoidance, flipped entirely. I no longer cared about external validation, about chasing fleeting highs or conforming to societal expectations. What truly mattered became connection, genuine human interaction, and the pursuit of knowledge. I stopped valuing material possessions and instead yearned for experiences, for learning, for genuine presence. My relationships, which had been fraught with distrust and fear, began to blossom. I found myself able to trust more easily, to love more freely, and to empathize on a level I never thought possible. The world, once a place of danger and disappointment, suddenly seemed overflowing with beauty, wonder, and infinite possibilities. I find myself constantly marveling at the simple existence of a leaf, the complexity of a raindrop, the warmth of a stranger's smile. I am truly, unapologetically happy, overwhelmed by the sheer privilege of existing in this world. My NDE shattered every preconceived notion I held about life, death, and the universe. Before, I was a skeptic, adrift in a sea of cynicism,
unable to grasp the concept of anything beyond the physical realm. Now I possess an unshakable certainty in the existence of life beyond the physical realm. Death is not an ending, but merely a transition, a shedding of the physical form, while the soul, our true essence, continues its eternal journey. I no longer fear death. It's simply a doorway to the next phase of existence. My understanding of God and the divine has also transformed. I don't believe in a separate, anthropomorphic entity called God. Instead, I understand that the universe itself, the vast, interconnected tapestry of existence, and our collective consciousness is God. We are all individual pieces of this divine whole, each carrying a spark of the universal light. This profound sense of oneness means that every act of kindness, every moment of genuine love we put into the world, raises the collective vibration, creating a better reality for all. Reality, I've learned, truly is a mirror, reflecting our energy back to us. My previous struggles with faith have been replaced by an unwavering, deeply personal knowing.
The NDE didn't just change my perspective, it bestowed upon me a profound sense of purpose. I now understand that my life's journey, particularly the difficult first 2 decades, was about healing from unresolved trauma carried from a past life. The visceral experience of being that dying little girl in the Appalachian woods, the feeling of vulnerability and unfulfilled potential, was a profound lesson in empathy and resilience. Now that healing has begun, my true calling has emerged. I realize I have innate gifts, a heightened sensitivity to unseen energies, psychic premonitions, messages from loved ones who've passed, and an intuitive understanding of strangers' inner worlds. My mission, my deepest desire, is to use these gifts to help others find their own light, to guide them through their spiritual journeys, and to serve as a messenger between this realm and the spirit realm. I want to share the message of hope, of connection, and of the inherent goodness that underlies all existence. I'm actively pursuing ways to integrate this calling into my life, exploring fields that allow me to connect with and assist others on a spiritual level. Integrating this experience into my everyday life hasn't been without its challenges. The most significant difficulty has been the profound sense of isolation that comes with knowing something so fundamentally different from mainstream understanding. Many people, even those closest to me, struggle to comprehend the depth and reality of what I experienced. Their reactions range from polite skepticism to outright disbelief, sometimes even a subtle fear that I've lost my mind. I've had to learn to navigate these conversations with patience and compassion, understanding that their inability to grasp it isn't a failing on their part, but simply a difference in lived experience. I've also faced the internal struggle of reevaluating my past. Every painful moment, every wrong turn, now appears as a lesson, a step on a larger spiritual path. This has led to a profound existential recalibration, where old anxieties seem trivial, yet the weight of humanity's suffering can feel overwhelming. However, armed with my new understanding, I know that even the most senseless pain serves a purpose for the soul's growth, and that gives me strength. The greatest lesson I've taken from my near-death experience is that love is the fundamental truth of the universe, and fear is the only illusion. We are all part of one vast, interconnected consciousness, and our purpose here is to learn, to grow, and most importantly, to love unconditionally. This lifetime, with all its joys and sorrows, is but one precious chapter in our eternal story. If there's one message I can leave you with, it's this: you are more than your physical body, more than your thoughts, more than your fears. You are a radiant, eternal soul, connected to everything that exists. You are never truly alone. Embrace kindness, seek connection, and surrender to the flow of the universe. The clock, the frantic rush we often feel, is an illusion. You have a beautiful eternity to become everything you are meant to be. Find your purpose, share your light, and remember, it's never too late to change. Hope isn't just a feeling,
It's a fundamental truth woven into the fabric of existence.